My name is Nina Recio-Cuddy, and with Jerry Lynn Fields, I serve as co-president of the League of Women Voters for Larchmont and Mamaroneck. Unfortunately, and we miss her, but Jerry Lynn couldn't be here today. On behalf of our league, but also on behalf of the League of Women Voters of New Rochelle and the League of Women Voters of Rye, Rybrook, and Portchester, we want to welcome you, point out our other presidents, Debbie Reisner, who's president of the League of Rye, Rybrook, and Portchester, and Cindy Kahn, where is Cindy? President of the League of New Rochelle. Also with us is Adelaide DeGiorgi, who's the president of the Westchester County League. Where are you, Adelaide? And we also have with us today a former president of the League of Women Voters of the United States of America, and that's Ruth Hinderfeld. Where is Ruth? Yay! So we do have a lot of league dignitaries here, and we're really so happy to have you here. And before I forget to do it, I really do want to thank the Davenport, because the staff and the people have been remarkably accommodating, and they have provided us with a beautiful location. So thank you so much to the Davenport. We also have a number of community officials here. Of course, first and foremost is our speaker, George Latimer, who's ubiquitous and shows up everywhere, and we're thrilled that he's been accepted our invitation to speak to us. Thank you so much. We have a number of other officials here, and I will ask them to identify themselves, and if I've left somebody out, I don't mind anybody shouting out that I've forgotten someone, because memory, they say, is the first thing to go. We are expecting Judy Myers, and she should be here soon. Also, I don't think Judy's here yet. Valerie O'Keefe, the town supervisor for the town of Mamaroneck. Ann McAndrews, Village of Larchmont trustee. Also, Marlene Colbert from the Village of Larchmont. The mayor of the Village of Larchmont is also here, Josh Mandel. And Jana Elkin-Enney from the Village of Larchmont, another trustee. We have the mayor of New Rochelle here, Noam Branson. We have two councilwomen from Rye City, Catherine Parker and Susanna Keith. Are they here? Yep. And Joe Sack. Sorry. Well, actually, he's a councilman. We have the mayor of Rye, Doug French. And the mayor of Portchester, I believe, is here, Dennis Pilla. I think he's here. We also have three members of the Mamaroneck Board of Education, Nancy Pearson, Lynette C., and Robin Nichinsky. I think they're here somewhere. And we have the former justice from the City Court of Rye, Justice Alfano, and also, I don't know if I've seen her yet, Dolores Battaglia. Ah, there she is, and Jean Marie Brescia. And we have the mayor of Mamaroneck Village, Norm Rosenblum. If I've left anybody out, please shout out, and my apologies. And I did all that without my glasses. One other person who should be recognized is Doris Block, because Doris served as the chairwoman of the event, and she did an outstanding job. Doris, stand up. Thank you. I don't want to take too long speaking, but I don't think we can let the afternoon go without noting that this is the 90th anniversary of the founding of the League of Women Voters. And it was founded after a 72-year struggle to get women the right to vote. And that was in 1920. So that was when we had our founding. It started as the National American Women's Suffrage Movement, and in 1920 became the League of Women Voters by Carrie Chapman Catt. And it was founded with the idea that it would help women who were newly franchised learn to exercise their voting rights and their political power effectively, and also to end discrimination against women. And in the 90 years since then, we've come very far. and we have now over 800 chapters in the United States. We have a wide membership. Our membership is open to men and women, and we deal with issues that go beyond just women's rights. We deal with international relations and with governance and social policy and the environment and natural resources. We are a nonpartisan group. We take our positions after careful study, and we are very, very happy that we have so much support in this community. I'm sure that many of you have attended one or another event sponsored by the League, whether it was an informational breakfast or a program at night to address an issue that's of local concern. And we appreciate the support that we have received from all of you. So we do thank you. But there's one other thing I'd like to do. There's a number of people here who have been members of the League for 25 years or more. And I would just like those League members who've been a member for more than 25 years to stand up. That's pretty impressive. That's really very impressive. So I hope you enjoy your lunch. Again, thank you for coming, and have a good time and enjoy the weather and the day. Thank you.
Resolution, because as many of you may realize, today is the 90th, this year's the 90th anniversary of the Larchmont Mamaroneck League of Women Voters. Actually, I'm not quite sure.
USA.
Of the USA, I was about to say, because that isn't true of us. But what I'd like to say, mention is the importance of the League and the work that the League does, and how for each of us it has meant getting informed in issues that are of national and state and local importance. And for me, personally, it was the start of this career I'm in. And because, for the better or the worse. But in 1980, I think, when I was president of the Mamaroneck League, no, it wasn't, pardon me. I've got the wrong, I became mayor in 77. So it was early 70s. When I was president of the League of Mamaroneck, I undertook to chair a study called The Financing of Education in New York State. And it was a very in-depth discussion of how education in our state should be funded. And some of you, I know over here, were in the study with me. And it is from there that I now find myself as the chairman of the Standing Committee on Education in New York State. So I really understand the significance of the League, and certainly not only to my lives, but to all of your lives, because it gives you a direction and things to fight for. And so I love the League. I don't know if this year is as much fun as it was in other years up in Albany, but we will get through this. But meanwhile, I just wanted to talk of my dedication to the League and wish every leaguer in the country congratulations on their 90th.
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. And I'd like to now introduce Doris Block, who, as I said before, was the chairperson of our event. And she will introduce George Latimer. Thank you.
Hi, there are two people we didn't introduce before. County Legislator Marty Rogowski from the 6th District, and Saul Cohen, a member of the New York State Board of Regents. Now, Nina did most of the names. She had the tough job today, doing all those names. I have the easy job, saying nice things about George Latimer. There used to be a commercial from Sara Lee that said, "Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee." And when we moved to Larchmont 19 years ago, the one thing we found out is that nobody doesn't like George Latimer. Over the years, many people have told me that George has done wonderful things for them in the community. Even more people have told me that George is their friend. In fact, sometimes I think George is cloned because he seems to be everywhere. He's at all the government meetings, the civic meetings, the charitable functions, the Board of Education meetings. He's always everywhere and working hard for us. By way of background, George is a third-generation Westchester native, a graduate of Mount Vernon High School, Fordham University, and with a Master's of Public Administration from NYU's Wagner School. He was a marketing executive with 20 years experience, and for the last almost 20 years, he has served us in government. 4 years on the Rye City Council, 12 years in the Westchester County Legislature, and now in his third term as New York State Assemblyman, representing Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye, Portchester, Rybrook, and part of New Rochelle. George has a long record of accomplishment for legislation. Now, George is going to speak to us today on what's wrong up in Albany and how to fix it. With all that's wrong in Albany, I don't know how he's going to do it in the time we've allotted to him. But if anyone can do it, it's George. It's my pleasure to welcome George Latimer.
Trust me, if I could clone myself, I'd clone myself to look like George Clooney, not like George Latimer. But I am very flattered that Nina and Doris reached out to me to ask me to be your keynote or main speaker today. I've been here to this luncheon over the last number of years. Tom Swazi stood here a few years ago, Michelle Page Patterson, the First Lady. It reminds me of those old Dean Martin roasts. Now, some of you are a little young. I have one of my interns here is a Rhinebeck High School senior, Walter Murphy, is here, so he won't know this reference. But for those of you of a certain age and older, Dean Martin used to have a weekly variety show, and then it turned into a weekly roast, and that was the days of the Don Rickles, Foster Brooks type of comedians. And in this particular one, each week they had a different honoree, and one week was Howard Cosell, who was the bombastic, a commentator. Keith Yeiser, is a sports nut, remembers Howard Cosell. And I think it was Muhammad Ali got up at the roast, and he said, "Why are we honoring this man? Have we run out of people?" On the chance that you run out of keynote speakers, since I'm always around, I'm happy to do it. I also want to congratulate you because you are at a very historical moment. You are part of illegal public meetings of the Rye City Council and the Larchmont Village Board happening right now. Holly, write it up in the loop because...
Oh, we're being televised.
Yeah, then you're being televised too. Never mind. But,
it's not me, George.
In any event, I appreciate the fact that I'm here to talk to you, not as a visiting dignitary, and certainly the high quality names in state government who could be here would be impressive and so forth. I'm the guy next door. I'm the guy you see, with Bill Fishman at the Clay Arts Center in Portchester. Diane Steinfink and I see each other at the library, and we have a cup of coffee at the Larchmont Diner. I see Pam Buckmiller at the State Howell Park Steak Dinner and at the Central School International Night. So it's the guy next door who's talking to you now. And I don't profess that what I'm going to say is necessarily undebatable. My friends Peter Lahr, who's here, John Alfano, good solid Republicans. They're good people. They're friends of mine. We debate. I listen. They argue with me. I'm usually wrong. But the bottom line is that it's subjective thoughts on my part. And they're thoughts for you to think about. And I think it's important because we're not doing much thinking about what's happening in the state. We're following the state government as if we were following Hollywood news. We want to find out who is Brad and Angelina. Are they breaking up or are they staying together? Or did Heidi Montag have all of this extra work done on her? That coverage of Albany, which has an element of importance in it. What is happening with Pedro Espada and his scandal? What happened with Tony Seminario and his scandal? Those things have their importance, but that cannot be the main focus of what's happening because we're at a time where there are policy choices to be made. And the Peter Lahrs and George Latimers ought to sit and talk about these policy choices and think about them and try to find what common ground there is to find. Because absent that, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, we are going to have a crisis in New York that exceeds anything we've seen to this point. And I would add to say this, and many of you have lived in other parts of the country. I'm from this area. I've lived in this area most all of my life. But I have lived in Pennsylvania. I have lived in Virginia. I've lived in Ohio. And if you have relatives in some of these states, these issues are at hand in Harrisburg. These issues are at hand in Hartford. They're at hand in Lansing. I'm showing you, I know my state capitals, you know. Capital of West Virginia is Charleston, attaboy, good job. So, but these are happening in state capitals all across the country. There are some states that are exempt from this, but New York is one of those states, and I'll talk about this in a second, that has created an extensive physical infrastructure of government and social infrastructure of government. And so states like us, California, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Illinois, we're facing the greater crisis because of the kind of governments we created based on what our populations were. Let me also highlight that as I speak to you today, I'm a representative. I don't think, and I hope this comes across in my dealings with you individually, I never consider myself a king. I'm a representative. You send me to Albany, you can recall me anytime you want. Anytime you want. And you get a chance every other year. And as much as those of us who run every other year, we moan about it. Marty Rogowski and I are doing coffee hour tomorrow morning in Port Chester, and Judy and I are doing it in the afternoon in Mamaroneck, and that's a constant thing that we do all the time, and it gets tiresome, except that that's what our founding fathers intended for us to do. They intended for us to be out there all the time. They intended for us to always be listening to what is Catherine Walker saying, what is Michelle Lewis saying, what is Carolyn Walker saying, what is Alice Tenney saying, and that becomes how you synthesize for better public policy. Not George Latimer in a room with a couple of other assembly members in some restaurant up in Albany, making decisions based on no outside input. Let me offer you some general thoughts about what's wrong and some general thoughts about how we deal with the problem that we have. The first one is we are dealing with problems from the framework of not one state, but 3 states. New York State is 3 states. You can agree with it or disagree with it. We are 1 part Michigan, we are 1 part Connecticut, and we are 1 part the city-state of New York City. If you've traveled through upstate New York, some of you may come from upstate New York, which, by the way, is always a debatable point. Upstate New York begins 50 miles north of wherever you are. When I was in grad school, Susie's nodding her head, she's heard this. When I was in grad school in Lower Manhattan at NYU, I was assigned to a project with a fellow kid from Brooklyn, Rich Genovese, I think his last name was. And he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Mount Vernon." And he said, "Where's that?" I said, "It's in Westchester." He says, "Oh, you live upstate." And I lived on the south side of Mount Vernon. Not too many milking of cows going on South 14th Avenue. But the perception from one part of the state, when you look at the problems of upstate New York, they are the problems of outstate Michigan. They are the problems of rural Ohio. They are the problems of parts of Illinois, downstate more likely Illinois. And those problems are very different than the problems we have in the city. Now, my friend Ann, who is active in the PTA over at Murray Avenue School, hails from upstate New York, the Binghamton area, right, Ann? That general area, Endicott.
And you know who comes
And
from there?
who else comes from there?
Lynette C. from Rutgers.
Lynette C. is also from there. I'll take constituents for 300.
Watertown, New York.
Watertown. My point in saying that is that, knowing Ann, I know some of the members of her family, when you talk about the problems of Binghamton, they don't sound like the problems of Rye Brook. There's some similarities to them, but they're in different worlds. What happened with, if you care to follow that area, the loss of the shoe industry of Endicott Johnson, IBM's tremendous downsizing in that area of the state, that has devastated the Tri-City area in the southern tier. And people in Mamaroneck and Larchmont and Rye and northern and south end of New Rochelle don't really know that. But the legislators that Susie and I sit with live with that reality. Similarly, in the city-state of New York, we deal with a political entity that is probably the bigger version of Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Hong Kong, where you have a city unto itself that has its own rhythm on a level that nothing is like. And those of us who live near New York, who go into New York and enjoy it, recognize how unique it is, how world-class it is. But the problems of a person who lives in Manhattan, gets their groceries delivered, doesn't have a car, or may have a car parked somewhere out in the suburbs that they might use when they go upstate, where you have different demographics, immigrants that are coming in from parts of the world that I don't even know around the globe. That is a different reality. And we are here in the Connecticut portion of New York State, or the northern New Jersey part of New York State, where we think about the property tax problem. But I assure you, my colleagues from Brooklyn do not think that Westchester's property tax problem is an equal problem in the state, and that's reality. And if you don't begin the process of discussing how do you close a budget and how do you solve the problems of New York State without recognizing that somebody who comes up to me on Frank Avenue, when I come to see Ron and Joan Caton, they say, George, do the right thing. They're saying do the right thing from the context of living on Frank Avenue in the village of Mamaroneck in the Connecticut section of the state of New York. That is completely different from what someone says to my colleague Bill Boylan, who lives in central Brooklyn, and who says they're cutting back our subway service, our school system is going to hell in a handbasket, they're closing the local hospital. Bill Boylan, do the right thing. That's the 3 states of New York. Second thing, I'm going to ask you to do something which I know you and the world are not going to do, watching home on TV if you're watching at this point. I'm going to ask you to throw out a phrase that you've heard from your mindset. Eliminate it from your mindset because you've heard it repeated for 6 years. You believe it is true. New York State government is not dysfunctional. It is not the right prescriptive for what's wrong with New York State. The phrase dysfunction makes you believe that enough changes of structures and perhaps even changes of personality would make the thing function better. It's not dysfunction. There is structural disagreement on how to deal with the problems we face. And it comes out of what I've just said about the 3 states of New York. It is not that the committees don't report properly to the next level. It is about the fact that when we debate what the policy should be, we can't get to common ground. We can't get the needs of upstate or the needs of the suburbs on a particular issue to have equal weight to the city, or the city can't get equal weight. But when you call it dysfunction, then you can come to the simple conclusion that the people in government are stupid, venal, and corrupt, and all you have to do is put the guillotine out in the park in front of the, in front of the thing, bring out those aristocrats, chop their heads off, let them roll down State Street, and everything will be better. Those of you who are students of French history, moi aussi, what did the French Revolution reign of terror lead to? It led to Napoleon, right? That's what it led to. When anger is so focused, turns violent, with no sense of proportion, no sense of how do you solve the problem, you wind up with a dictator. And that's been proven time and time again. Now, I'm not arguing that that's going to happen within a state government, but it is a cautionary note to making sure you diagnose the problem properly. It's not dysfunction. It's separate sections in a state that have different visions of what taxing should be, what public policy should be, and those sections and those people have to figure out how to accept each other's presence married together in the same state. So that when my friends say there's too much social service out there, we should just slash it. Brother, there's 2.2 million people in Brooklyn, 2.1 million people in Queens, 1.4 million people in the Bronx who do not agree with you. Now, do we have to cut spending? Yes, we do. But you're not going to cut it coming out of a perspective that you have when you've got 8 million people that don't agree with you. You will have gridlock, which is where we are now. I want to add, Susie and I are not getting paychecks right now. I can't speak for Susie and Marty, but George, if I owe you some money, don't expect it anytime soon. Hopefully it'll come. So we have some skin in the game. Dysfunction is a misnomer. It's disagreement. And you've got to appreciate that and get to it. The next thing we have to understand is that the political structure of New York State, and this is heavily influenced by the one-party parts of the state. This part of the state, the Connecticut part of New York, the suburban part of New York, is a two-party system. We just announced a host of people, all of whom have been elected within the last year, 2 years maybe at the most, and there are both Republicans and Democrats in that mix. If we were in the Bronx, or if we were in Ontario County, every name that would be introduced would be of one party. Be different parties in Ontario and the Bronx, but here it's not that way. In this area of the state, you have a two-party system. And if a person performs poorly in office, there is an option, and that option is often taken by the voters. But since that's not the case in much more of the state, we have operated in New York State with a model of control rather than cooperation. In the Larchmont Village Board, there is a model of cooperation. They argue and disagree. On the Rye City Council, there is a model of cooperation, not control. There's disagreement on issues, even amongst people within the same political party. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, if Joe Sack and Susanna Keith disagree on a particular issue, they work within a framework of cooperation and mutual respect. A political structure of control does not view that. They view the other guys, if you're not in power, as having no role to play at all. And if you want some anecdotes, Susie will give you 20-some-odd years of anecdotes of what it's like to be in the minority when you have no power at all. And you might be treated nicely in the hallway. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you, Senator. But when it comes down to having your input go into an issue, it doesn't exist. We cannot, as a state, survive if we don't work bipartisanly. Period. Period. Exclamation point. If, as a Democrat, my only job is to convince other Democrats of my point of view and jam it through, we are going to fail. And I might add, the same is true for my Republican friends. We're watching in Washington and in Albany a behavior on both sides of the aisle that says, we don't need you. Oh, you don't need us? Then we're not going to work with you. That is an RX for failure. Next issue. We campaign at the extremes, but you have to govern in the middle. Now, when you campaign at the extremes, what does it mean? It means that the first thing you have to do is go get your party's nomination for a position. At some level, there's rarely primaries. You hardly ever see primaries at the more localized levels. But when you do see primaries, what do you see? In the Democratic Party, the pull is to the left. The most motivated Democrats hold the most positions furthest to the left. And in the Republican Party, the people who are most motivated hold the positions furthest to the right. And when you have intra-party conflict, the moderate Republican and the moderate Democrat is forced to prove their validity to the people who are more truly liberal or more truly conservative. And many times, and you're seeing it around the nation in both parties, Joe Lieberman in Connecticut, Charlie Crist in Florida. And whether you like either of them or don't like them, what I'm stating is a matter of fact. So as the campaigning process pulls you to the extreme, send the most conservative Republican and the most liberal Democrat and tell me if they're going to have common ground to work together. The answer is no. They're going to go back and say, as they said in a letter to William Jennings Bryan in the famous Monkey trial, the Scopes trial, guy wrote him a letter and said, fight those guys till hell freezes over, then give them a round on the ice. It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to laugh. And I think those of you who've been involved in the political process know what I say is true. Those people who hold singular, complete visions of governance, which come out of an ideology that's fairly fixed, do not want you to trade off anything. They don't want you to find common ground. They want you to uphold that standard, absolutely. And that gives you no way to find common ground, because the minute I step 5 steps close to Valerie, I get a little electoral jolt. And the minute Valerie moves 5 steps toward me, she gets an electoral jolt. So we sit there and we say, geez, Val, you know, I guess we have to go our separate ways, and that's it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate debates to be had, and you should have them, and you should have them with vigorousness. And as you work through them, while you're doing the debating, you need to figure out, what am I hearing that I should absorb into my final answer to this? And that's what we're not doing in this state, and I might add nationally. We have given in, I think this is a national issue as well as a state issue, we have given in to the politics of resentment. What is the politics of resentment? Somebody's got something I ain't got, and I don't like it. I resent it. And that drives my politics. That drives the way I look at people in the world. This person has got this. How did they get that? I don't know. And you know, I'm angry about it. I grew up on the south side of Mount Vernon. Any of you know about Mount Vernon? There is a defined north and south side of Mount Vernon. I know my friends in New Rochelle live all the day with north end, south end issues and so forth. But let me tell you, it is absolutely, or at least when I was a kid, it was worse in Mount Vernon, because we had actually a train track that goes through the town. It's a trench, and you cross over to the north side of town. I'm telling you, my neighborhood, mostly African American, and then some, you know, working class white kids. When Johnny Rivers came out in '66 with Poor Side of Town, baby, that was our anthem. We were on the poor side of town, and we felt it. We felt it socially as well as economically. The politics of resentment makes you oppose things just because you resent the people who propose it. And we don't have the luxury for that anymore. We don't. If somebody that I disagree with, if somebody's got more than me in whatever that means, then I have to get beyond that. And that also involves the explosion of ethnic politics. And I wouldn't be telling my friends the truth if I didn't tell you that our identity and ethnic politics has gone too far. We've gone too far defining ourselves by our ethnicity rather than by the content of your character, which is what Dr. Martin Luther King asked us to do. We're too busy worrying about the color of your skin and what ethnic connection I have with you as a basis for whether or not Amy Jovis is going to believe what I say or not. It can't be about ethnicity. It's got to be about content, you know? Now, I hope as an African-American, Keith, I'll point to you on this. I grew up in a black neighborhood, and I remember amongst my African-American friends, they had something called a paper bag test. And if you know what the paper bag test is, it's looking at the relative color of your skin as an African-American to determine whether you are lighter or darker than a paper bag. I passed the test because I'm half Italian. And the bottom line is, in those days, when we would play sports together, it didn't matter what color your skin is. The question was, could you get the runner in from third base? That's what mattered. Could you block the man that you were assigned to block? So I learned from playing sports as a kid in that neighborhood that you stop thinking about ethnicity. But sometimes we flipped it on the head. Sometimes we've said the demographic accomplishment of having a person of a certain demography in an office is in and of itself the answer, is the goal. And it isn't. We want the best quality person in that office. And I hope that that will be diverse. And you will have as many outstanding women, as many outstanding people of whatever ethnic background they have. But we've let the politics of resentment take us too far. And the politics of ethnic identification. Let me finally say on the negative side, all of these things contribute to why the budget ain't done. I know this is kind of long. I hope it's interesting. The next and the final point I want to make is the point I made earlier with some depth to it. We have created in this state and other states, and you can say blue states if you want because you'd be pretty close to true, we have created a social and a physical infrastructure that is significant in size. And at the time it was built, roadways, sewer systems, certainly educational institutions, fire departments and police stations, we built them as part of an effort to try to provide services to the growing population base that we had in the 1900s. When were all the villages incorporated? 1896 Mamaroneck Village, 1904 Rye Village. We'll have to exempt Rye Brook for this discussion. 1868, I think, Portchester, Dennis. That was incorporation based on a certain time and date and place. Arizona did not develop at the same time. Neither did Nevada. They built different infrastructures. Now that we have to make cost cuts, it's harder for us to do it because we have a physical and a social infrastructure. People will say that Medicaid in New York is the Cadillac of Medicaid systems. How many of you have heard Cadillac of Medicaid? Raise your hand if you have. Right? What Cadillac of Medicaid means is we have the most extensive system of coverage. We cover dental, which South Carolina doesn't. The discussion is, should we? Not the statement that we have the most extensive program, but should we? And that's the debate we need to have internally, and it has to be an intelligent, dispassionate discussion, because our social and our physical infrastructure is created at a level that may or may not be sustainable economically, but we can't just deconstruct it with an axe. We have to talk about how we get those services provided. Now, let me mention a movie that was out about 14 years ago. You may have heard of it. It was called Titanic. If you haven't seen it, boat goes across the North Atlantic. It's an iceberg based on a true story. My daughter, who is home this weekend, but basically in West Virginia, who I hope will never see this on LMC-TV, was at the time 12 years old. Anybody have a daughter who was 12 years old at the time the Titanic came out? Raise your hand, Nancy Pearson. Right. No, not when the movie came out, I'm sorry. When the movie came out. If you had a daughter who was 12 when the Titanic sank, you should be the guest speaker. My daughter, like daughters of that age, Nancy, help me out if this is true, they saw this movie multiple times. multiple times. Why? I don't know. It was a good movie. Saw it. But so my daughter, it was Leonardo DiCaprio, but I bet they didn't go see him in Shutter Island. I'll tell you that. When my daughter took me to see it, which is exactly what happened, and I think it was the 5th time she saw it. We went out to have a cup of coffee afterwards. And she was, Dad, what did you think of the movie? And then she went on to tell me what she thought of the movie, which basically was Leonardo DiCaprio was so hot and wasn't a love story. Great. So I proceeded to then, when she said, what did you think? This is when Megan should have used her noodle. She grew up in my house. She knows what happens when you ask George Latimer your opinion of something. You get 19 paragraphs of something. So I gave her 19 paragraphs. And what I basically said is there's 2 scenes in the movie, honey, that meant something to me deeply. The first scene was after the boat hit the iceberg, and the people in the bridge knew that the boat was in danger, and they started putting out the flares. And the first shot, the cinematography, was you're on the deck of the Titanic, and you're seeing the flares go way up in the sky. The kids are out there kicking the ice around. It was like 4th of July. It was fireworks. Then they show the same moment from an aerial shot in the North Atlantic, and you see these little set of lights down here with these little lights going above it in this vast black North Atlantic to show you how vast it was that they were trying to find help in. Freeze that frame. Second frame that mattered to me was the moment at which the boat sank. Now, every disaster movie is the same movie. Every one. Towering Inferno, Volcano, Earthquake, same movie. First third of the movie, you meet a bunch of people. Crisis happens at the 1/3 mark. The last 2/3 is who lives or dies. Towering Inferno, Robert Wagner dies. O.J. Simpson dies. But Richard Chamberlain dies. But Steve McQueen lives. Paul Newman lives. So bottom line is, at that moment in which everybody was trying to get off the boat, there's a scene where all the people down in steerage were trying to get out. And they got up to the gate, and they were rattling like this, and you could see the fear and the anger of the immigrants, and they took the bench and they bashed it against it, and they got up to the top of the deck, and there was no way for them to get off the boat alive. Now, my daughter's pretty bummed out as I'm telling her this, because she sees this as a love story, and I see this as a metaphor for politics. We are in this boat together. Central Brooklyn is in this boat, the Adirondacks are in this boat, and Rye City and Mamaroneck and Larchmont are in this boat together. And we are in the middle of the vast North Atlantic together. Coming up out of steerage, or you're John J. Astor and his wife, if you remember the movie, they're in the boat. The Guggenheims, I think, are in the boat. They huddle together in bed. They know they're going to die, and they're going to go together. We're in this boat together. There is no profit to pick on what Brooklyn ought to do, or for Brooklyn to pick on what New Rochelle ought to do. And that is where we start the process of solving the problems of Albany. Let me start as a legislator by saying we need a strong, confident governor. I cannot say as a legislator that I always like what executives do. I've been a legislator all my government career. My corporate career, I was never the CEO of a company. I had some responsible positions. But the bottom line is, at the very top of a structure, you always need strong leadership. You need strong gubernatorial leadership. You don't need a tyrant, but you need somebody who has a sense of purpose. And I'm not advocating for any of the candidates. There's a time for that and a place for that. This is not that time or place. But as we look to the next round of elections, which will bring us a new governor, we have to have a governor who is not just a tough guy, but engaged in public policy. Somebody who can talk policy, not just generalities. And a governor who understands people and politics as well, because you're in a political structure. You don't accomplish things with speeches. You accomplish them in interpersonal relationships over a period of time. And how you move those relationships, some carrot, some stick. Every one of you that's ever done anything in your life that was an accomplishment, you understand how tough it was. Valerie runs a town. It ain't no picnic. As a boss of mine once said, the marketplace will discipline you. And the marketplace has disciplined New York. We have failed at various times to have engaged leadership, to have forceful leadership, or leadership that focused on issues instead of personalities. And we have suffered now over a number of years. I'm not telling you I should be the governor, but I think it's pretty clear that you need governors, and this covers the last couple, that have to engage. And unfortunately, in New York State, and this is a New York, California kind of thing, our governors have to be bigger than life. It's not right, whatever it is, but this is a big media market. The best of the best live in Manhattan, and they move out to Westchester. And you know, neighbors on your block are world-class at everything. They're world-class bankers. They're world-class academics. They're not looking for little two-bit politicians to tell them they should be impressed with their little assemblyman or their little county legislator. These are bright people who expect to see in leadership positions people with a force of personality that defines what leadership should be. And that includes those of us in the legislature in leadership positions. Let me tell you the next thing we need, which we don't have equally around the state. We need an energized citizenry. The citizens of New York State are not to blame for our problems, but they are indeed an unindicted co-conspirator. Now, I've left on your table two things, which is your homework assignment. You ain't getting off that easy. This is the Legislative Gazette. It's a newspaper printed for free in Albany. Every week, I bring back copies of these and I put them in the 5 libraries of my district. I don't put my name on them so you can say, oh, that was George Latimer. I don't do that. I just put them there for you to get them. And if you care about your state, you ought to read this every week. Because other than the Albany Times-Union and to some extent the New York Times, most of the rest of the publications of the state do not cover the public policy choices in New York State. And how can you have a conversation with me and Marty tomorrow morning in Portchester from 9:30 to 11, or with Judy and I from 2 to 3:30 at the Nautilus Diner, unless you can sit here and say, George, Marcellus Shale, let's talk that through. That's a serious public policy issue. Let's talk about where we are with the cutbacks that we have in the correctional institutions, and how are we going to handle that public policy issue? How are we going to handle health care? What are we doing in terms of the Wall Street issues within the context of New York? The second thing I left on your table, this is only an example. I don't want you to just focus on this as if this is what I'm peddling. This happens to be a list of bill ratings by Environmental Advocates of New York. Environmental Advocates is one of any number of different organizations,
They're lobbyists.
who have public policy positions on bills that are before the legislature. I'll bet you nobody goes on these websites, and there's other groups like this, and if you have a public policy interest there, I'd be happy to link you to the different groups. And by the way, those that are of the left and the right, you should read all the points of view. But this particular website, which you can find up here, if you go on, you can go on to each of these bills, click it on. They give little trees for good bills, little smokestacks for bad bills. And if you read the bills, then all of a sudden you say, geez, Rena Beater says, you know what? I didn't know that was an issue. I didn't know that was a public policy issue in the state. Steve Meyer says, I had no idea they were discussing this issue up there and where it is at it. And that's the missing link in having an electorate that holds public officials accountable. You're all smart people in this room, but you don't have the exposure to the policy choices, and because it's not given to you in an easy format, you don't know, so you'll get somebody in the campaign get up and say, you know what? I'm tough on crime. Hey, I'm tough on crime too. Thank you. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of the Rockefeller drug laws? What does that mean? Is it the right policy to have incarceration for possession or not? Is it effective? My boss in the private sector, I'd walk in, I'd say, we got a problem. He said, get out of here. I don't want to hear the problem. When you come back in here, you're getting paid. If you're going to tell me a problem, you're going to come back in with your way to address the problem. Otherwise, I don't need you. And you hear that, and you're like, okay, I get it in Technicolor. You need to be able to know as citizens what are the policy choices that are out there. And the tough part about it is you can go to the Larchmont Village Board, the Mamaroneck Town Board, the New Rochelle City Council, the Rye City Council, the Portchester Village Board of Trustees. You can see it on cable TV. You can go right there to the meetings and look at the decision makers. In the New York State Legislature, you do have Susie and I who are here in the area, and I might add from New Rochelle, you have Amy Paulin and Jeff Klein. Let's make sure everybody gets proper credit. But you don't see the whole legislature in its entirety. Our public hearings don't have open public dialogue in the way that the county and the town and the village and the cities do. So you need to do some homework to be an engaged citizenry. And I must tell you, we have to find out somehow how to get an engaged citizenry in the outer boroughs of New York City. There just has to be. There just has to be people who live in sections of Queens and Brooklyn who also care about these things. I'm not saying no one does, but there is not the structures necessary to have this kind of debate. Most New York City residents focus on New York City Hall. They view the New York City government as the deliverer of services, and Albany is sort of this off-to-the-side kind of government. And they send 60 of the 150 members to the State Assembly. I don't know the number in the Senate. I assume it's somewhat equivalent. I'm into extra overtime. We need structural changes of all sorts. This is the stuff you hear about. We do need independent redistricting reform. There's a bill, Mike Generis in Queens, I'm on it, Amy Paulin's on it, Sandy Galiff is on it, creates an independent structure for redistricting. However many of you were around 10 years ago when I chaired the county legislature, we did as good a job of independent redistricting as we could. We took members of the League of Women Voters and put them on our committee. And we treated, we went to the Journal News, and we said, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to put 2 minority members in the same district. We're not going to redistrict people out of their seats, which were time-honored traditions of redistricting in the past. And we had a redistricting plan that came out, that looked good on a map, kept communities to the greatest extent whole, not perfect, no lawsuits against the plan. So I've seen it done at the county level. It can be done at the state level. It may require a gubernatorial veto to drive it, but we need independent redistricting. We need campaign finance reform. Now, I understand that there's a philosophical disagreement between people, between whether or not you should have public monies go into campaigns. I think we can all agree that we have to have lower spending limits, lower amounts of money that can be donated in chunks, because when you can get a chunk of money from a particular interest, you may not be beholden to the interest, but you're going to pick up the phone call first when you know that that person sent you whatever that max amount was. And we've got to find a way to get to where we can be on that. I think personally, I think we need to have primaries for special elections. One of the biggest ways that members of the legislature get reelected is because they're in office already, because they came in through a special election. The special election, the party selects who runs. There's no open primary. It's an extra step, but it's an extra step that allows all voices to compete for the open seat, rather than just giving it to your favorite candidate. Now, I've never had to run in a special election. I know it's a shrunken environment of people who come out and vote. There's a special election that's going to go on in the county legislature in the next month in the northern end of New Rochelle within Eastchester. And one of the things I would like to see in the future, it's not going to happen now, is to make sure that that process is long enough to allow for a primary. It's messy, it costs more money, but it's more democratic, small d. I favor June primaries. Why? September primaries, in my humble opinion, are incumbent protection plans. If you get 7 weeks after a divisive primary and you win the primary, you're going after an incumbent, you're behind the 8 ball. And the incumbents know it. A June primary says, let's get this stuff out of the way. By the way, in June, not September when people just came back from vacation, you're trying to get the kids to school or whatever, and then bang, there's a primary election. But in June, when people can focus on it, and now the major parties on June, whatever date, 5th, 8th, 10th, whatever, the next day after that, the 2 major parties can get their teams together, get their people out, and you get your choices, and they're clear. And if there's an independent candidate, you get that person out there too. It will require those of you like me who collect petition signatures to do it earlier in the year in the winter. That's not a lot of fun, but it's a better democratic solution. We need to rethink the income tax and what its role should be vis-a-vis the property tax in the funding of schools and Medicaid. Our property taxes are high for lots of reasons. Right now you're hearing it's the cost of labor. And I'm not going to tell you that labor costs aren't a major factor. But the single biggest reason why we have high property taxes, in my judgment, in Westchester County, is we're paying for certain services in New York through the property tax that in every other state is not paid through the property tax. And that's Medicaid at the county level. That's a baseline of school funding in New York State. And when people come up to me and they're angry about taxes, they're almost always talking about the property tax. Almost always talking about the property tax. Now, if we relieve that Medicaid burden, which I favor, I want to see the county have a dollar-for-dollar decrease in spending so that that dollar amount goes straight to your bottom line and reduces your property taxes. It's not an opportunity for the county or any other government to spend it. I think I've said enough. Let me say one more thing and then I'm done. Maybe 2. We do have to rethink compensation and pensions. We have to rethink it. Absolutely we do. But let me also say this much. I made a decision this year, which I made unilaterally, to take a voluntary pay cut of 3%. It hasn't come into play yet. Thank you. It hasn't come into play yet because I haven't gotten a paycheck yet. But when it does, I have to send a check of 3% of my take-home. I can't do it at the front end because they don't allow for that. So when I get my take-home check, I write the 3% of it and I send it back to the state. Not donate it to a good organization. Kick it back into the till, even if it doesn't mean anything in numbers. Because let me tell you, my friends, you will never get concessions from the workforce unless the electeds take the first step. Every politician who wants the unions to make a cut in pay, freeze this and that, they got to belly up to the bar first, or they're not going to get to first base with anybody in the workforce. You know that's true. and I know it's true. And it's been the big unsaid thing over the last month and a half of looking for concessions. Let me close, as a baby boomer would, by telling you that as I drove over here for my last stop, I have the tendency not to listen to contemporary music. I listen to the stuff I like. And the album I was listening to on the way over is the Beatles' White Album. Now, I will tell you, aside from being a big Beatle fan, the White Album came out on November 22nd, 1968, which was my 15th birthday. So whenever I hear that song, da 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 da, you sage, but it came out on my actual birthday. Now, it also happens to be the same day, 5 years from when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So I have two major things that happened on my birthday. The death of John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. The release of the White Album, November 22nd, 1968. So I listen to that album a lot, and it means a lot to me as I think back of what it was like to be a kid where I grew up. And there are some terrific songs on the album. I'm certainly not going to sing them to you, but I will be at karaoke at the Airport Holiday Inn if you want. But there is one song, it's an instrumental, and it's very soft, it's a very quick and short song, Blackbird. And if you have the album, and you're listening to it, amongst all the, the high-tempo songs in there, just sit and just listen to Blackbird one more time. Those of us of a certain age and older. Sorry, Walter. I'll play it for you, but blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you are only waiting for this moment to arrive. We have broken wings in New York State. We do. There's no question we do. Now the question is, are we going to see this as the opportunity that it is? We're going to moan about it. We're going to get out the guillotine, pitchforks. We could do that. We could do that. We could look for, every scandal that's going to happen. When I go to the LT with Josh Mandel, follow me when I leave. Make sure I consume the right amount of alcohol. Or we can use this moment to change what this thing is. And then, we're not going on Mount Rushmore, my friends. We're not going on the nickel or the dime. But when we get to the point in time where we're at Linda Foreman's United Hebrew and we're sitting with friends of a certain age, and we look at each other and you say, you know what, Josh, Valerie, Susanna, Joe, Doug, Susie, Marty, you know what? In our time in the arena, we did the right thing. We can feel good that we did the right thing. Thanks.
As a token of our appreciation, we want to present this to you from
Thank you.
all three leagues.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll see every one of you sometime this weekend.